Welcome back. Well, the big news today is the release of the core PPI, Producer Price Index. So we can see on a month over month basis, this is the highest level we've seen in 3 months. And excluding July, this is actually the highest level we've seen in, well, almost a year or so. Core PPI, Producer Price Index, that's the level of prices at the producer wholesale level, not including food and energy. So this really does show that inflation is broad-based. Here we can see on the left-hand side, the yellow PPI 0.5% month over month, year over year in red 2.2. Core PPI, excluding food and energy, the more volatile components of the inflation gauge, month over month of 0.3%, year over year up 2.7. Interesting, notice the PPI, which again includes food and energy, on a month over month basis is up more than the core PPI. And that shows us in the short term, energy has pushed up the PPI more than the core PPI. But if you take out food and energy, it's actually everything else that's more inflationary on a year over year basis, 2.7% versus 2.2. Here we can see in yellow PPI on a year-over-year basis, core PPI, excluding food and energy, both have come down quite a bit, but have ticked back to the upside. Interesting that the yellow line seems to have accelerated faster, and that includes obviously energy, but the overall measure is very close. It really does show us today's report does show us that energy, while it's inflationary, there's a lot of inflation, not including energy. It's a lot more broad-based, the inflation. Here's core PPI on a month-over-month basis in red, standard PPI month-over-month basis in white. The past 3 months for PPI and core PPI are marking very significant highs, probably the highest highs we've seen all year. Here we see the white histogram bars. That's a federal funds rate. Certainly, the hike in interest rates did slow down inflation, but now in yellow, PPI, Producer Price Index, year over year basis, back to the upside and with quite a lot of gusto. As well, Consumer Price Index, which we're going to get tomorrow, that is also moving back to the upside. So it's not, only the inflation is not only felt on the wholesale level, but both wholesale and consumer level. Here we see core CPI, Consumer Price Index in whites. The standard CPI is in red. Below that, core PPI, Producer Price Index in green, and then the standard PPI in yellow. The biggest drop, and then the biggest, I would say, recovery over the past couple months has been the PPI, again, including food and energy. But it really does show us that everything seems to be moving together. Also, notice a very big tick up in CPI year over year. It'll be interesting to see if that does continue tomorrow. Now, here we see in yellow, it's the PPI on a year-over-year basis. The red line is crude oil, and very interesting chart here. Strong correlation. Again, the standard PPI does include energy prices, and it is a very strong component of the overall inflation number. And then this is probably the most interesting. The red line is PPI minus CPI. The white line is the S&P 500. First of all, notice a very strong correlation. Both lines move up and down together. Now, we did see a divergence. Stocks towards the beginning of this year took off to the upside as inflation came down. Well, I'm sorry, it's not inflation. It's PPI minus CPI. What does this calculation mean? It's producer prices minus consumer prices. Now, when the red line goes up, it means the producers are paying more for the raw goods and services than the consumer. It's almost like the consumer has a discount. Well, that makes sense because as producer prices go up, well, the S&P 500 goes up as well. And as producer prices versus consumer prices go down, meaning let's say the extra cost at the consumer level gets passed on the producer level gets passed on to the consumer, well, that's not so good. And that goes down. But interesting enough, as we've seen a big bounce back up to the upside in PPI minus CPI, so far the stock market hasn't really followed suit. It'll be interesting to see if the stock market is able to regain some recent highs, given the fact that producer prices are a little bit more than CPI. But then again, we don't know what tomorrow's CPI is. We could turn around tomorrow and see that consumer prices really caught up to the hike in producer prices. And again, the takeaway from this The hike in inflation that we saw today in the PPI, it's not food and energy only. It's a lot of other things. Will that lead the Federal Reserve more towards a tightening bias? Well, that'll be left to be seen. We have some Fed speakers, coming out, and of course, tomorrow's CPI is really big as well. And we'll be sure to update you with any changes along the way. We hope this has been helpful. We look forward to seeing you back soon.